Elite Prospects just released our new rankings for the 2025 NHL Draft. We'll break them down on detail on today's episode.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Haddock Helikesh, QMJHL and Crossover Scout for Elite Prospects, with Sebastian High, USHL and Crossover Scout for Elite Prospects. And on today's show, we'll be breaking down the newest rankings from our team here at Elite Prospects. We released our top 64 with honorable mentions here, updated after the World Juniors. And we'll be breaking down the first round in detail on today's episode. The top 5, first and foremost, in the first segment. We'll talk through all 5 names, why we have them in that order, all that good stuff. And then the second segment, look at picks 6 through 15 with a focus on some specific conversations that happened over at our meeting, which lasted, I believe, was it 4 hours, Sebastian, where we just hashed it out on prospects?
It was nearly that. It was definitely over the 3-hour mark. Definitely some long conversations to be had, some very lengthy, not always debates, but presentations about players that various scouts felt strongly about. But it was a great time, and a lot of also just learning and listening to the other scouts speaking about players that they've watched like half dozen times or a dozen times for many of them. So it was a really good time just being there with everyone in the meeting. And in the end, we did hash out a full top 64, but it felt like we spent the first almost 3 hours just on the first round there.
Yeah, absolutely. It was an in-depth conversation. Speaking of which, in the third segment, we'll also be looking at the standouts from pick 16 through 32. We're not going to name 32 names for you today. We're just going to focus on the major conversations in the second and third segments there. So before we get into any of that, just make sure to like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Remember to leave us a comment as well, letting us know what you think of the episode, what you think of the rankings as well. We're interested to hear your feedback. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please leave us a rate and review and make sure to make us your first listen of the day. So let's get started right away here with the top 5. And at this point, after what we saw from him at the World Juniors and everything leading up to it, there is no doubt about it. Matt Shaefer is the number 1 overall pick on our board right now, and he's there by full 0.5 scale if you average out all of our rankings at Elite Prospects of each individual scout. His average ranking was 1.2, the next guy 1.8, so it's becoming a tiny bit clearer there at first overall. Really dynamic skater, really high-end creator from the back end, fantastic puck mover, fantastic rush defender. There's just so many ways that Matt Shaefer can impact the game, and I think we went into detail into this an episode ago. So if you want the in-depth breakdown of what Matt Shaefer does so well, just go and watch that episode. It's the last one we put out. It's called the Matt Shaefer Prospect Spotlight. So make sure to tune in. It'll be in the top left corner as well, so make sure to check that out. But yeah, let's dive right into number 2. I mean, we've already broken down Matt Shaefer in detail here. One guy we haven't done a prospect spotlight on yet, James Hagens, is at number 2 here on our rankings. Give me the breakdown. Like, why? What makes James Hagens the number 2 overall selection here at this stage, ahead of guys like Michael Misa, Porter Martone, Roger McQueen, all those guys?
Pure dynamism, and it's coming together really brilliantly at a high level of play this season with Boston College in the NCAA. He's been just tearing apart college defenses alongside Gabe Perreault and Ryan Leonard this season. He had a really strong World Junior Championship there on that top USA line with his same line mates, even though it wasn't perhaps quite as extraordinary as some fans may have hoped to see. He wasn't like the tournament MVP or anything along those lines, but it was a really convincing display for James Hagens, but not quite enough to stop Matthew Shaefer from leapfrogging him. But that has a lot more to do with Shaefer himself, that profile being so young for the draft class, already so refined and having these fantastic tools, despite all the adversity and injury issues he's faced in that process. So James Hagens has been developing fantastically. So it's not at all a knock on this player, just about how tight it is at the top end of this year's draft class. But with James Hagens specifically, we talk about the dynamic rush offense a lot on this podcast. It's the thing that stands out the very most when you first watch him play. But what else in his game has perhaps grown this season that is making him entrench this spot in the top 2 or top 3 debate?
Yeah, I mean, he's becoming a bona fide 200-foot player. Like he's supporting play incredibly well in all three zones. He's cycling low on breakouts to help his defensemen kind of have outlets to pass out of their zone, kind of skate the puck up the ice. He's been using his skating also in much more effective ways. Modulating his pace, kind of slowing down, accelerating in transition, instead of just overwhelming guys with speed, which you saw it a lot from him in the NTDP last year. Was very much a skate at your feet, cut at the last minute, and take a shot in motion type of rush attacker. But he's really kind of modulated his pace a lot more. He's just becoming a much more mature offensive creator on top of the defensive game improving. And even the physical tools are getting impressive at times. Like he's able to fend off checks. He's able to head into the boards, get his feet planted first, gain advantageous positioning on defenders on the forecheck. Yeah, he's becoming much more complete and a lot less limited in what plays he can access, which is very important. So yeah, even though Matt Shaefer's leapfrogged him pretty comfortably, I still think that James Hagens is a phenomenal player. But moving on to number three, and here there's no doubt either. It's Michael Misa. He is a phenomenal offensive talent. He is just tearing up the OHL right now. Major producer over there. But it's really the details in this game. And I think, I can talk about this on and on and on. Like the details with Michael Misa are so polished, right?
They really are. The habits, the intelligence, the quickness of reads, the spotting of teammates in goal scoring positions through multiple layers of defense. Michael Misa is a really good thinker of the game and has refined that aspect of his play significantly over the past 3 seasons now of playing OHL hockey. And we talk a lot about how he's had like Shane Wright comparisons to his game in the past and how he thinks the game, but he's added so much more dynamism and pace around that cerebral nature this season that makes him just as potent offensively as he is tactical in his offensive implications. And I think that gives him significant offensive upside as well in the NHL. Not quite the same level as a guy like James Hagens, perhaps. Maybe like more of a 90-point upside rather than 110-point upside with
Yeah.
Michael Misa. But you're going to see a lot more defensive quality, a lot more versatility in where he's deployed around the ice, and in my opinion, also a very comfortable natural centerman.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been very interesting to watch this year. Very complete. And again, I don't see why teams don't see a center in him. It just doesn't. It's so strange. Like he's been playing center like pretty consistently for the past 2 years. He played center at the top prospects game. Maybe that sold him on it because he did have a very good game as well. Regardless, he was great. But moving on to Porter Martone at number four. We can have that conversation between Misa and Martone. We've had it before. I think that Misa's overall physical inclinations, his physical details are so much better than Martone's. Martone dominates through weight, dominates through brute strength. But the mechanics aren't there. But what's there with Martone is phenomenal playmaking vision. He is an insane passer, and he strings together plays so comfortably, right? Like his ability to feel back pressure, to spin off of checks, to find open ice in the middle of the ice is really effective when he's on. I think the consistency dropped him below Misa for sure, because even I'll agree, Porter Martone's pure skill level is higher than Misa's, and I don't think there's much debate there. Like as much as Misa's a very skilled player, Martone has more pure skill, but it's about consistency. It's about the translatability of his physical details. I think once he starts facing physically mature 6'3", 215-pound NHL defenseman, the advantages that he's able to create with his body are going to slowly dissipate if he doesn't adjust. So it's going to be a key component of his development. And finally, a guy who's been injured for months, Roger McQueen, is still in our top five. Can you talk me through why exactly that is?
The profile and just the amount of skill he was showcasing in that small sample early on this season. I think that was 8 games he had before he went down with injury, and he's just been out ever since. But this is a 6'5", 197-pound right shot centerman. He can play the wing as well. He's a pretty dynamic skater for his size and a fantastic puck handler, really dynamic rush creator, and a guy that can use his frame, especially like more and more so in the past, like maybe like the last 6 months before his injury. He was showing significantly more physical implication of being able to create through contact and using his physicality as an offensive tool rather than just a defensive thing, or leveraging his reach to be a pickpocket in the neutral zone, which he's already been doing decently well for over a year now. So a lot to like with this player. Still very raw, but a bunch of runway. Think of a bit like a guy like Quinton Byfield in terms of that flashes of fantastic upside, combination of physicality, intelligence, and skill, but still needing a lot to put it all together at the NHL level. And we've seen that with Byfield too. It hasn't all been smooth sailing in the NHL, but the skill is just so high end.
Absolutely. So we'll take a quick break and head into pick 6 through 15 and note the notable conversations we had about that range. But yeah, just a quick word from our sponsors first. Whether it's the World Series, the Super Bowl, or the Olympics, the world's top athletes get to play in these top level sporting events thanks to one thing, that's teamwork. And teamwork can also help protect your financial legacy and your family's future. Select Quote's licensed insurance agents are the perfect teammates when shopping for customized, affordable life insurance. They can get you the right policy to keep your financial legacy safely in your family's end zone. Select Quote is one of America's leading insurance brokers with nearly 40 years of experience, helping over 2 million customers find over $700 billion in coverage since 1985. Other life insurance brokers offer impersonal, one-size-fits-all policies that may cost you more and cover you less, while Select Quote's insurance agents work for you to tailor a life insurance policy to your individual needs in as little as 15 minutes. Oh my goodness. So get the right life insurance for you for less at selectquote.com/locked-on-NHL. Just go to selectquote.com/locked-on-NHL today to get started. That's selectquote.com/locked-on-NHL. Alrighty, so moving on to our second segment, we'll go through the major conversations we had about picks 6 through 15. I think the Jackson Smith and Victor Eklund conversation at 6 and 7, I mean, we can go through that quickly. It ended up being just the projectability. Jackson Smith's a 6'3.5", 195-pound defenseman who can defend the rush well. He's super aggressive. He's got flashes of skill. I think that took over on Victor Eklund's overall upside and ridiculous amount of motor. So that was an interesting conversation and ended up with Smith and Eklund at 7. But the conversation after that was a trio of WHL forwards with fundamentally different approaches to the game, but equal levels of overall projectability and upside. I think it starts with Carter Bear at 8. I think him and Eklund were closer than him and Lakovic, especially in Mitch's eyes. Mitch absolutely adores Carter Bear, and I don't blame him. Like, those two are very, very similar, like Seth Jarvis-esque, just high-end forecheckers, high-end effort players who are going to win battles, tick people off, get off the boards and make plays, right? Like, that's kind of the identity of those players. But it really gets interesting after that, where you have Lakovic and Smith, who I'd say are the most opposite players in this class. But yet both ended up here at 9 and 10 overall, right?
That they did. I mean, Lynden Lakovic is a 6'4", 190-pound left shot winger, while Cameron Schmidt is a 5'7" right shot winger. So playing opposite flanks, but also being very opposite frames, and also having opposite physical approaches, and not in the way that you might suspect based off of their sizes. It is Cameron Schmidt, the 5'7" buzzsaw, who's a lot more physical, and a lot more effective in his physical application. He's a really elite level skater, high end hands, high end playmaking, high end goal scoring. The tools are elite, but it's the physicality that supports his entire game, the raw intensity and pace that is really what knits the entire fabric of his game together into a potentially NHL projectable package. There's still definitely questions around that, and none of us are expecting an NHL team to spend a 10th overall selection on this player, but we do think that there's a good chance that he ends up being a top 10 player in a redraft, looking back with hindsight in 5 or 10 years time. And I mean, the skill with this player is just phenomenal.
It's off the charts. It's insane. And the skating as well is absurd. Like, this kid is blindingly fast. So to have that as a toolkit along with physicality and have that skating benefit the physicality the way that it does. He just, like, the way he picks up steam, like, that's how he hits guys. That's how he trucks through guys and wins forechecks. It's just by like using his forward momentum that he generates through his speed to just bulldoze through players. Is really interesting. Whereas Lynden Lakovic is a lot more of a finesse player. He's got a lot more kind of soft skill. He's got the projectable frame, but he hasn't really shown the ability to use it really consistently. It's there in flashes. It was there at the CHL Top Prospects game. There are some moments where he showed a lot more physicality than he has in the dub, but he's also very interesting due to the frame and skill combination. Very interesting prospect. Reminds me a bit of Slavkovsky at times.
Yeah.
In the way that he approaches the game in terms of a playmaking big winger. But moving on to another interesting conversation we have to talk about, Cameron Reed is at number 11 in our rankings here. And he's been phenomenal this year. I mean, just so much offensive skill, so much dynamism from the blue line. He's been controlling defensive rushes incredibly well as well for Kitchener over the OHL. He's 5'11" and 3/4, 193 pounds, but you wouldn't really tell that he's sub 6 foot when he's on the ice. He's able to handle his own physically pretty well. There's enough there, for a left shot D below 6 feet. It's very rare for them to get picked in the top 10. And I don't think he gets into that range, but he's fairly close. Like he's got a lot of skill here to talk about. Now moving on to our next conversation, Caleb Desnoyers versus Justin Carbonneau. And I'm not going to spend an eternity on this. I feel like we've had this conversation before on the podcast. And I really had to fight for it this time. But we ended up succeeding. We got Caleb Desnoyers ahead of Justin Carbonneau in our rankings. Desnoyers ending up at 12th and Carbonneau ending up at 15th overall in our rankings here. And I think the real difference maker and the thing that convinced Mitch to take my side on this is just the fact that Caleb Desnoyers always manages to convince coaches to play up the lineup. He's always going to play top 6C on any team he plays on, whether it's the Hlinka Gretzky Cup team, whether it's obviously Moncton this year, which is both the best and the oldest team in the QMJHL, and he is their points leader by 20 points while being their youngest player. He's always going to play up the lineup because of his competitiveness, because of his intelligence, and the fact that he's able to take leadership of teams. We've seen it so far this year from Moncton, and it's been pretty impressive to watch. He's been phenomenal this year for the Moncton Wildcats, and you have to reward that with a higher spot. I think he even goes in the top 10. I think in some NHL teams' eyes, he might even be closer to 5 than to 10, from what I've heard. Like teams seem to love this kid and understand it. You have to take into account the mental aspect, and he has it. Whereas Justin Carbonneau is, I'd say, 5 times more dynamic than Caleb Desnoyers. But his mental aspects, composure, decision making, competitiveness, they vary from game to game, and that's what kind of led me and led our team overall to finally put Desnoyers ahead of Carbonneau in our rankings and have that kind of be cemented here in this board. Any closing words before we kind of head into the next segment here? Because I believe we do need to talk about one more prospect that we kind of skipped over in this conversation, right?
We do have one more player in here that's quite notable, and that's Jake O'Brien of the Brantford Bulldogs in the OHL, who came in on our board at number 14th overall. Pretty big riser for us here in the past month. He's been really catching fire in Brantford, part of a three-headed dragon in attack with the Bulldogs, alongside Nick Lardis and Patrick Thomas. All three guys are well over a point a game, and Jake O'Brien has 55 points in 43 games so far this season, and a lot of that's being generated by high-end playmaking and high-end stick handling ability. He's really dynamic with the puck at his stick, and he's a player that is really pushing the pace significantly more now than he was earlier this season. Earlier in the year, he could be a little bit invisible during some shifts, supporting his line mates quite effectively, but not always finding the ways to make that big difference, to change the tune of the game. But he's been doing that significantly more regularly here in the past couple months, and we've been recognizing that in our group, and we've had many very good viewings of this player. So he's a guy that has been definitely a riser here for us on this board. And in the next segment, we'll be focusing on a lot more players, and many of them have very specific flaws in their games, which is why they're not all A-grade talents, but all of them have some really intriguing aspects too. It's a very interesting back half of the first round in this year's draft class.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll get into that in just a second. Let's just take a quick break and head right into the second half of the first round of our Elite Prospect rankings here at Locked On NHL Prospects.
From the first whistles of the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. The FanDuel app is so easy to navigate, and the variety of bets keeps every single game exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for your winnings. Whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add some extra excitement to the mix in the playoffs, FanDuel has got you covered. Whether you want to take your big swings on the NFL playoffs or on European football with the Champions League now starting back up in the new year, the choice really is yours. Or perhaps you are a hockey fan or a golf fan or a tennis fan. Whatever it may be, FanDuel has something to offer every kind of sports fan. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today to get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
Alrighty, so let's close things off here with our final segment. We'll review kind of the top conversations that we had about picks 16 through 32, which led to us spending 2.5 hours on the first round in our meetings. It was very, very interesting. And I think the conversation starts obviously with the first three guys in this range. The first three guys in this range, Brady Martin, Malcolm Spence, and Anton Frondell, who ends up at 18th overall on our board. Let's talk through it. I mean, we're talking about three trucks of human beings, right? Like Brady Martin's got that country strong, like you feel like he could lift a trailer type of strength. Um, and then you have obviously Malcolm Spence, who's got that 6'1", 203-pound frame with high end skating as well. But he's one of the older guys in the group. And then you have Anton Frondell, who's also a tank of a human being. But what separates him and what led him to be in this order, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I think as you mentioned, these are three players that have some similarities in how they approach the game. All of these guys have some really good defensively responsible habits in their play. I mean, Anton Frondell, for all of the lackings, I guess, on the puck, especially in transition this season, which has just been almost non-existent so far this year, and how he's
Yeah.
been supporting play in that aspect of the game. He's been so solid defensively, and the reason he's been so uninvolved in transition is because he's been dropping so low down in the defensive zone to help support down low and to add another big body in the mix. And he is so much more physically imposing than his 6'1", 198-pound frame would perhaps indicate. Like, this is an absolute truck of a guy. And I think there's some similarities there with Malcolm Spence, where there isn't perhaps this offensive dynamism. With Spence, you have some really good supportive habits down low in the offensive zone. With Frondell, you have that big booming shot, a pretty big threat on the power play as well when he has some space to work with. And with Brady Martin, it has to be playmaking, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, you're talking about a guy who's able to find passing lanes behind his back really efficiently. It's really the small area playmaking as well. Like he's not zip the pass across the ice type of playmaker. He's a really good tight quarters connector. Really good at finding these small 6-foot passes that just extend play. Playing low to high, playing smart hockey. He's a real throwback player. Not the type of guy you're going to expect to flash his way to the NHL, but he's going to consistently outwork, outmuscle guys along the boards, win his battles, get to the net. He does all the old school hockey things, which I think will be a decent breath of fresh air in a very modern draft class. I would say, like it's very interesting. Meanwhile, Malcolm Spence, for lack of a better word, he's been kind of bland this year. I haven't really liked his offensive involvement as much in the past couple of months. But he continues to be like just a great skater with a really projectable frame. He's one of the safest projections in this draft class, I think. Like he's going to be an NHLer no matter what happens. I just don't think the upside lends itself to 75 plus points a game at any stage. I don't see that in his future. But I see a really effective two-way winger who's going to be positionally sound. He's going to skate the puck up the ice. He's going to, chip and chase it on the forecheck, win its battles, and just extend possession. Going to be just a really effective guy that you can trust in all situations, which is good, but it's not enough to break the top 15 and the level of talent we have in this range. For example, just think Albano, who's like pretty much the opposite, right? Like this guy has 6+ grade tools in every position, pretty much. and just has to polish up his decision making. I feel like it's the opposite with Malcolm Spence. The skill level's a bit lower, but he's a really, really sound decision maker. And I think that's been the issue with Frondell, as you mentioned. The transition metrics have been awful. Like they've just have not been good, not even just at the Allsvenskan level, like the World Junior A Challenge, even, which is pretty much the lowest level that Frondell should be playing in any given draft year. Like that's usually reserved for third to fourth rounders. He's in there and he's struggling. J20, same thing. Transition wise, it wasn't good. He's really reliant on his teammates to produce off the rush. And on top of that, I just don't think the level of hockey sense is as high as it's been made out to be. And I don't think the skill level is able to compensate effectively enough. So I think those are the issues. But Frondell, with his truck of a frame, with his shot, he's going to be able to produce in the NHL. But let's move on to some other conversations that we had regarding this, because we just spent 5 minutes on this talk, which is very similar to what happened in our meeting. But Ben Kindel, Bill Zonin, and Shane Van Sage was an interesting conversation, because those three are all three of them are limited skating, that have limited skating. But interestingly enough, we went with the 5'10" guy who doesn't really skate that well above the 6'2" and the 6'3" guy who can't skate all that well. So talk me through that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, it was a very close conversation with a focus on just like what is the biggest separating tool among these players. And in the end, it was Ben Kindel's skill and playmaking that was just the most separating factor among this group, even though he is definitely the smallest of the bunch. But he's fifth in WHL scoring this season. He's at 68 points, including 44 assists in just 41 games this season with the Calgary Hitmen. And it's been just a two-man show there this year with Tulk on that top line. But he's been just lights out and just pushing the pace constantly. He's been expanding his game massively over the course of the season. This is a player that wasn't even in that many top 64 conversations at the beginning of this year, and is now a pretty clear first-round talent and just so much skill. Whereas with Bill Zahn, I mean, a player that you've loved all season long, so physical, really intelligent, high-end playmaking, a lot of really good compensatory habits to offset those skating limitations with Zonin, and all that while adapting to playing center on the top line of all situations too. Like, it's been a really impressive year for Zonin here.
Top line center.
I know,
Just
top line
like,
center in the QMJHL, and he's second in the league points while playing a new position, struggling. I mean, not being the best skater in the world, and still like succeeding in this way. Very impressive. And Shane Van Sage is the most physical, not just of this bunch, but maybe in the entire class. Like, he's an absolute locomotive when he gets going, and he's had no issues adjusting to the NCAA in terms of the physical aspect. So he's a player that could be a really good physical specialist in towards the bottom of a lineup someday. But moving on here, we still have a couple last names to mention, and one player I know that you have loved watching, especially since making your in-depth video on Michael Misa, has been Christian Epperson, who's, I mean, season-to-season transformation from the NTDP to the OHL this season has been fantastic.
It's been insane. Like, this kid has turned into a monster in Saginaw. And, I expected, when I started ISO viewing him after really noticing him in those shifts, I expected to see a guy who really relied on Michael Misa to kind of be effective. Christian Epperson was creating a ton of space for Michael Misa in those viewings that I had. And like, it's the physical details. He tries to truck through guys, a really aggressive forechecker, gets off the boards consistently, really sound habits. I think he's like tailor-made to be playing with Michael Misa. And both of them have been kind of borrowing each other's hockey sense so far this year and kind of playing off of each other really well, which has been so interesting to watch. And on top of that, there's some sneaky skill there. So for an overager here to be in our first round, I mean, that's telling of how good Christian Epperson's season has been so far in Saginaw. He's been absolutely phenomenal. But Leslie, let's close things off here with two guys from your neck in the woods who we just managed to squeeze into the top 32 there. Will Moore and a newcomer, Vaclav Nestrasil. Let's talk about those two there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I had a lot of waiting around until my USHL guys came around on our board because there were not any significant top 25 contenders in my region, despite Ivan Ryabkin being there. That's a topic for another day.
Yeah.
But William Moore, I really like what he's added into his toolkit in terms of the physical habits supporting his play. He's actually initiating contact a lot more. He's not nearly a physically dominant player. He's still a very lanky guy, can still get pushed off the puck, but he's actually lowering his center of gravity, planting himself down, trying to resist contact rather than avoiding it entirely. And it's just changed his game. He's been accessing playmaking pockets in the offensive zone that he just wasn't getting to at all the entirety of this season up to maybe December. And he's been doing that just more and more frequently now. And especially with the return of LJ Mooney as well, who's probably the most energetic player in this entire draft class. That incessant pace has been opening spaces for Will Moore that he's just been exploiting really quite nicely here so far. So he's a player that I'm warming up on. He hasn't moved up really in our board. I think he dropped a couple slots here as well. But in terms of my personal valuation, I'm warming up to him a little bit more. I'm starting to see what this player could become into with years, but he's still so raw.
Do you mean you're warming up? I'm sorry. We're never doing that again. Let's.
Well, that's the last episode of our podcast. We have to retire now after that.
Yeah,
oh my god!
Oh my goodness, that was horrible. Vaclav Nestrasil.
He's also great. Yeah,
awesome.
He's very fun as well. Nestrasil was our top-ranked Muskegon lumberjack here, ahead of both Ivan Ryabkin and Luka Radivojevic, and he's a really fun player. This is a 6'4", 190-pound right shot winger with a really high motor. He's a really gritty, not fun player to play against. He gets underneath opponent's skin, just constantly pestering and applying pressure defensively. Really good forechecker and neutral zone defender. So a lot to like there. He leverages his massive reach really effectively at the OHL level. He's a bit of an octopus in that neutral zone area, and that has just been getting him more and more minutes here as the year's gone on. In the most recent weekend series against Lincoln, he was Muskegon's most used player both on the power play and the penalty kill, on top of playing top line minutes at even strength. And there's a lot of really good vision and skill with this guy too. The projectability is really nice in terms of the profile, but he's still very raw in terms of putting everything together. And it's mostly flashes that we're working with right now. But the potential here is very much top six caliber from what we're seeing. The skill level is really impressive. That vision, the skating, there's a lot to kind of like here in flashes and a lot to work with in terms of the runway. So a player to definitely keep your eyes on.
So violent, so unbelievably violent. Like it is insane.
In the USHL of all leagues, like players don't know how to deal with that whatsoever.
The refs don't know how to deal with it. Like he's getting away with so much. Like it's insane.
It's great.
But that's
very fun to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's our episode done. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, remember to like and subscribe. Let us know in the comments what you thought of the episode. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please leave us a rate and review and make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, remember to check out Locked On Fantasy Hockey. We've got Steal and Flip giving you the best advice that you can get out there to maximize your fantasy returns. And make sure to tune in for our next shows as we continue our prospect coverage for the month of January. It's been Haddock Kalakash with Sebastian High. Thanks for tuning in, and we hope you tune in next time.